G'day guys and gal. Power scaling the Emperor and his Primarchs has always been a bit of a challenge. At times, the Emperor is a living flaming god of war, able to obliterate entire armies with a thought. At other times, he's an old man in a chair barely keeping it together, and currently he's the galaxy's most powerful battery. Likewise, his Primarchs aren't the most consistent either, with them sometimes able to take out Titans, and then other times they nearly get taken out by Space Marines. However, having read the entire Heresy series and many more Warhammer books on top of that, I have a very good understanding of their power at each stage of their life. So I thought, why not do a spicy what if? What if the Primarchs, all 19 of them, teamed up against their father in an all-out war? What if there was no Webway project and the Emperor was uncaged? Could he and his 10,000 custodians take on the full might of his sons and their legions, or would he stand no chance? Before we get started, the sale of the Omega continues for one more week. Honestly, my new favorite model from the range. This devious fellow features multiple head variants, a custom base, and a lot of riz. He also comes in 3 scales: tabletop for your wargaming needs, art scale for those that want bigger details and enjoy just painting, and Titanic for the beasts of you out there that want a genuine project to work on. Once he is gone, he is gone. Speaking of which, there is only 48 hours until the Grey Slayer diorama, the Praetorian vs Peter Turbo diorama, and the Voldemort launch are gone for good. July was an insane month of releases, and I want to give a final extension to these 3 releases in particular to give you one last chance to get them. Links to everything will be below. Getting the major minis is the best way to support the channel whilst getting you something awesome in return. Today we'll explore the what if of the Emperor and his sons engaging in all-out war, seeing who truly would come out on top. Now let's get into it. Okay, you may think this video is a bit retarded because the Emperor barely won against half of his sons, with the other half on his side. However, you need to remember that pretty much for the entirety of the Heresy, the Emperor was useless. His Webway project failed, taking the Custodians off the board and forcing him to put his entire concentration on the Golden Throne. If the Emperor was able to freely strike out at the traitors ahead of 10,000 Custodians, the Heresy would have ended extremely quickly. So in this what if, there is no Webway project and there is no chaos. In a strange turn of events, all the Primarchs believe that without a doubt, the Emperor seeks to use them to ascend to godhood, then dispose of them afterwards. Let's say that in this what if that is the case. They are not mind controlled, the Primarchs are fighting for what they believe is a desperate and righteous cause. Each Primarch is equipped with their expeditionary fleets and their legions. The Emperor has the entire Custodian Guard, Sisters of Silence, and Solar Auxilia. To keep things simple, Mars stays neutral, with most of the Imperium also not getting involved because it's a messy family dispute and those are awkward. The Emperor has the Solar System minus Mars, as well as Battlefleet Solar, as well as the Assassin Temples led by Malkador. So what would happen? Well, it would be a pretty short and decisive war. There would be no attrition or time the Primarchs are just spending getting juiced up on chaos. They would siege the solar system with their gigantic fleets, led by their Gloriana class ships as well as the Phalanx at their heart. There would be no Abyssal class wordbearer ships though, as those were made by Lorgo when he went traitor, which isn't the case for this what if. The Primarchs would know that fighting the Emperor in the field would be rough as fuck for them. The Emperor is ungodly powerful. He made the entire wordbearer legion forcibly kneel without much effort, then he also one-shot nuked an army of wordbearers on the Vengeful Spirit. Although to be fair, that was when he was ascending to become the Dark King, which isn't the case here. Basically, the Primarchs would need to isolate the Emperor from his forces. If they could have him surrounded by 10,000 bolters and 19 Primarchs, that would be their best bet. The naval battle wouldn't last long. Battlefleet Solar is mighty, as are the Emperor's 2 personal ships, but against all Legion fleets and the Phalanx, they wouldn't have a chance. Likewise, the Emperor would not put too many Custodians on the ships, where they could be killed without being used to their full effect, which is rampaging through Astarte formations. So the Space Marines would be boarding Battlefleet Solar ships with very little the mortal crews could do to stop them. Many ships from the Legions would be destroyed or crippled, however, potentially even a few Glorianas from engaging the Emperor's personal ships. Likewise, if the Emperor was on board one of his ships, you best believe that man is psychically ripping other ships apart, then likely teleporting to Terra when his ship begins dying, as the Emperor's ships had unbelievably powerful and accurate teleporters. Now the Primarchs ideally would not want to exterminatus Terra. They aren't bloodlusted psychos here, and even if they did, the Emperor's own powers, as well as the Imperial Palace shields, or whatever Dark Age of Technology shit he has locked up, would likely be able to counter cyclonic torpedo bombardments. Now the Emperor is massively outnumbered. The Space Marines would be able to land on Terra without too much issue. Solar Auxilia are good and there would be shitload of conscripts, but each Space Marine Legion also has their own guardsmen attachments, so that would effectively cancel out the Auxilia. Now due to the neutrality of Mars, Titans are mostly absent from this war. However, the Emperor does have a handful of Titans sworn directly to him, most notably the Side Titans from Ordo Sinister, which are a nightmare to deal with. Basically, the legions would be mostly unopposed until they reach the palace, with even then, the Emperor, or more likely Malkador, not putting too much effort in defending the outer walls, as they just don't have the manpower. Instead, Instead, the legions would be funneled into tighter formations within the palace grounds, where a smaller force would be able to hold off the larger one. Now, in a straight up firefight, custodians don't actually have too much of an edge. Sure, they have better armor, better aim, and are tankier, but if 100 space marines are shooting 100 custodians, many of the custodians will die in order to take out the 100 Astartes. It's a bad trade. However, in melee, the ratio is significantly higher for the custodians. It's hard to put an exact number on how many marines a single custodian could slay in melee combat before getting taken out, but it's high. Some custodians have been known to cut through hundreds. The Emperor's best chance would basically be able to get the space marine legions in a kill zone, then mass teleport the 10,000 on top of them. Custodian teleporters are extremely advanced, with custodians able to begin fighting mid-teleport, no lag time or post-teleportation discombobulation. Now, Primarchs aren't just retards that would put their legions into kill zones either. They know custodians are a huge issue. With there being almost 1 million or so marines at this point, they would have the inner palace surrounded. However, between Malkador, the Emperor, and their Dark Age of Technology gear, many of which would come from the Dark Cells, they would be able to set the board to their design. At the right moment, the trap would be sprung. 10,000 custodians in full war gear would materialize among the 1 million Astartes and begin slaughtering them. Now, yes, the marines could just start firing rockets towards each custodian, however, it would result in an ungodly amount of team killing, with the brotherly bonds between Astartes generally meaning they wouldn't just indiscriminately massacre their own battle brothers in the hopes to also take out a custodian. Likewise, if one legion started blowing up another to try kill the custodians amongst them, it would be taken extremely poorly. Another factor is that many space marines were curious about fighting custodians. Many believed they could take them, as not all had seen custodians fight, so the marines would fight the custodians man to man, eager for the challenge. Now, custodians have been shown to be quite weak against psykers, with the Thousand Sons actually killing a fair few during the fall of Prospero. However, the Sisters of Silence would be scattered amongst them, meaning the custodians would be immune to psychic attacks, even from Magnus. Each custodian would need to kill 100 marines to be able to equalize the numbers. A pretty tall order. Some custodians, like the Alaris, would kill more. Valdor would kill shitloads. However, the legions also have dreadnoughts, terminators, librarians, and so on, as well as a few champions like Sigismund who aren't too far off a custodian themselves. However, the idea wouldn't just be to kill all marines. The Emperor would need to take out the Primarchs. Here's where it gets interesting. In a 1v1, the Emperor can dog-walk any Primarch, no diff. He knocked out Lehman with a single soft punch, and he dominated Lorgar with a thought. If the Emperor was able to catch out any Primarchs in the open, it would be a very quick slaughter. I don't see them surviving more than a handful of seconds. No, the Primarchs would need to face the Emperor altogether to have a chance, and I genuinely do believe, with their combined strategy, they would be able to bait him. Maybe they have Lorgar as bait, but then a combination of Alfarius fuckery and Magnus sorcery makes the Emperor blind to the trap. Either way, as the multicolored armies of the Primarchs are fighting against the golden army of the Emperor, the Master of Mankind himself would end up face to face with his creations. Now, in the lore, the Emperor has a few anti-feats that make him seem beatable. The time he was wounded with a vortex grenade, the time an orc war boss grabbed him and was crushing him until Horus saved him, the fact that in battle, the Emperor often psychically fought with his sword and used pretty basic psychic powers like fireballs and shit, rather than just making every bad guy in a 10-kilometer radius have an aneurysm. Not to mention the time Chaos puppeteered his custodians and made them attack him. The Emperor fought them with his sword and he actually took some wounds. Although to be fair, that was likely due to his shock, and when he did regain himself, he was able to immediately end the puppeteering and then put most of them out of their misery with a single thought. Overall, I genuinely don't think he could just click his fingers and Thanos snap his Primarchs. Likewise, his multi-dimensional god shit that we saw in his fight against Horus was after he had a huge power boost from absorbing the warp and banishing the Dark King. Grey Crusade era Emperor wasn't at that level. In saying that, we don't know how many of the anti-feats were him deliberately acting a bit weak so people wouldn't realize his full power or think he was a god, or if he was just having an off day. What we can say is that he would have to get stuck in, especially with psychers like Magnus able to take his psychic attention. Now, because there was no heresy, we aren't dealing with psychic Morty or Lorgar, so only really Magnus would be carrying the team there, while the rest charge in. It would actually be an extremely epic fight. Flame and Lightning would look out from the Emperor, striking a number of his sons and pushing them back, as the Emperor engaged the others in melee. Primarchs like Sanguinius, Conrad, and Jagadai would be the first to lock blades with the Emperor, being fast enough to avoid the psychic blast. Magnus would enter a psychic battle with his father, keeping the Emperor's attention away from the other Primarchs, so the Emperor couldn't just freeze them or implode them from the inside or knock them out. However, it would be a losing battle for Magnus, who would be quite literally dying just to give his brothers a precious minute or two. The martially weaker Primarchs like Lorgar, Alfarius, Amigon, and Gilliman would be amongst the first to die, never seeing the fatal strikes that would cleave their heads from their body, not fast or skilled enough to deflect. Angron would also die early, his bloodlust and aggression putting him in front of the Emperor. However, Angron would also be the first to land a strike on his father. His ferocity and lack of concern for his own life knife, allowing him one strike past the Emperor's guard before he would be slain with claw and sword. Whilst Ferrus and Vulcan would press the Emperor from the front, Sanguinius would dive bomb him over and over again, whilst Fulgrim, Conrad, and Jagadai would attempt to strike from the back. Other Primarchs like Dawn and Mortarion would circle, looking for openings, as after all, the Primarchs are big boys and they can't all attack the Emperor at the same time. Perturabo would be putting down firepower, however I also believe he would be next to die, the Emperor firing a devastating barrage of psychic death at him to silence his guns. At this point, numerous Primarchs would lay dead, with the Emperor himself receiving multiple wounds. Malcador and his assassins would try to reach the Emperor, as would Valdor and his custodians, but the sheer mass of Space Marine elite, like the Terminators, would block their path. Now Magnus would die next, his life force burnt out by the effort of holding back his father's will. This is where it gets hairy for the Primarchs. The Emperor would be worn down and wounded for sure, but so would they, and now he can turn his psychic attention to them. I still don't think he could just pop them though, however he would be able to scatter them around and give himself breathing room to focus on one at a time. Primarchs like Mortarion, Ferrus, and Dawn, the slower, stronger ones, would be the next to fall, as the Emperor would target the highest priority, lowest mobility threats. Vulcan would die numerous times, being the team's tank, each time regenerating as the Emperor wouldn't have enough time to strike with an attack serious enough to properly take him out. Now Sanguinius is the most powerful Primarch. We know this, however he was killed very quickly by Horus when Horus powered up. A powered up Horus that the Emperor was able to almost match. Now again, the scaling isn't 1-to-1. Sanguinius was significantly more powerful during the end of the heresy than he was during the Great Crusade. Likewise, the Emperor was more powerful in his duel with Horus than he had ever been, and as such, I believe Sanguinius would be one of the last to fall. Likely he and Conrad, as their foresight would allow them to dodge numerous fatal blows. Other than Vulcan, none of the Primarchs are perpetual or regenerate. Like sure, they heal way faster than normal, but no way near fast enough to heal broken bones or large open wounds during the duration of combat. The Emperor on the other hand is a perpetual and he does heal like that. A mace crush from Horus, an impalement from Sanguinius' spear, a rocket from Perturabo. The Emperor would just not be particularly bothered by these. He's been wounded by way worse and he just kind of walks it off. Fulgrim and Jagadai would fall next, their accumulation of wounds slowing them down long enough for the Emperor to finish them off. With only a few Primarchs left, tired and wounded, the Emperor would now have enough breathing room to psychically dominate them and bring them to their knees. From there, he could smite them one by one. Perhaps he leaves Sanguinius, the Lion, and Horus among the last because he likes them the most. However, Vulcan himself would be the very last. Now Vulcan is a tough cookie, however the Emperor, his creator and a fellow perpetual, whose frozen psychic essence is literally a perpetual slaying weapon, would be able to kill Vulcan, and if not, he would be able to permanently incapacitate him, thus ending the fight and the war. I really just don't see a win condition for the Primarchs here. Getting the Emperor alone in a 19v1 is the best they could hope for, considering the Emperor's intellect, foresight, and Malcador's intelligence. This would ensure that they would never be able to ambush him in a way that gave them such a massive edge, i.e. starting off the fight with a vortex bomb to the Emperor's face. Magnus is very powerful, but he is a hard second to the Emperor's psychic might. An interesting note is that Lehman does seem able to release a howl that disrupts people's connection to the warp. When Magnus would fall, there's a solid chance Lehman may whip out that to try suppress the Emperor's warp power. However, the Emperor literally hangs out with the Sisters of Silence without issue, so I feel as if he is above that. With the Primarchs dead, the battle would be over. Sure, the Space Marines would fight to the end in a bit of rage, but the Emperor would pretty much be able to make most, if not all, of the Space Marines freeze up, kneel, and then be executed by the Custodians. There is a reason why GW put the Emperor on the bench for almost the entire heresy. He's just so ungodly powerful. When he was finally unleashed, the dude was a freak, slaying mega demons without issue, one-shotting armies without breaking a sweat, and able to almost match the power of Horus, who was so infused with the power of Chaos and their gods that when Horus died, it nearly killed Chaos itself. It would kind of be like one Space Marine versus 20 humans, but the Space Marine is a perpetual and a librarian. There is 1,000,001 ways this what if could pan out, but it would almost always result in a showdown, and I just don't see the Primarchs having a win condition for that, even when given a favorable setup. More likely than not, the Emperor would beat them with significantly less effort than I have described. If you enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel, then pick up a major mini. Last chance before a whole bunch of awesome minis leave the range. Hit the subscribe button, hit the real subscribe button for more spicy what ifs. Join the Discord for more memes, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.